Las Vegas, October 3, 2025. The night before Game 1 of the WNBA Finals. Cathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the league, walked into a press conference she had probably been dreading for days. The cameras were on. The reporters were ready. And the first question wasn't about basketball. It was about a private meeting from 8 months earlier. A meeting where, according to one of the league's biggest stars, Engelbert had said something so dismissive about Caitlin Clark that the entire WNBA was now in open revolt. The accusation was specific. Napheesa Collier, the Minnesota Lynx forward and vice president of the Players Union, had claimed in a stunning 4.5-minute statement that Engelbert told her Caitlin Clark should be on her knees, thanking the league for everything it had given her. Engelbert sat at that podium in Las Vegas and denied she ever said it. She used the word inaccuracies. She said she was disheartened. And then she walked off into a finals weekend where her own players were calling her leadership the worst in the world. This is the story of how a private conversation in February became a public war by October. How Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, got pulled into the middle of it. How Caitlin Clark, sidelined by injury for most of the season, ended up at the center of a labor dispute she never asked to be in. And how the commissioner of the fastest-growing league in American sports may have lost the locker room entirely. Stay with me because the details on this one matter, and most of what you've heard so far is only half the picture. To understand how we got here, you have to start with one night in late September of 2025. The Minnesota Lynx were the top seed in the WNBA. They had spent the entire regular season looking like the most complete team in the league. And in Game 3 of the semifinals against the Phoenix Mercury, with 26 seconds left and the Lynx down by 4, Napheesa Collier went up for a play and crashed to the floor after a collision with Phoenix forward Alyssa Thomas. The injury was bad. 3 grade 2 torn ligaments in her lower leg. A torn muscle. The kind of damage that ends a season and forces a player to spend the entire offseason in rehab. Collier was finished. The Lynx would lose Game 4 and get eliminated. And somewhere between the MRI room and her hotel suite at the Phoenician in Scottsdale, Arizona, Collier sat down and started writing. What she wrote was not a polite statement. It was not a player carefully picking her words to avoid offending the league office. It was a 4.5-minute scorched earth indictment of Cathy Engelbert, the WNBA's commissioner, and everything Collier believed was wrong with how the league was being run. She talked about officiating. She talked about player safety. She talked about money. And then she got specific. She said that during a private meeting in February of that same year, she had asked Engelbert how the league planned to address the officiating problems that had been a complaint all season long. According to Collier, the commissioner's response was, quote, "Only the losers complain about the refs." That alone would have been a story. But Collier wasn't done. She said she also asked the commissioner about the pay gap between what star players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and Paige Buchers were earning on the court versus what they were generating for the league in revenue. And according to Collier, the commissioner said those players should be, quote, on their knees, thanking the WNBA for the platform it had given them. Those were the words that ended the relationship between the players and the league office. Those were the words that turned a private meeting into a public crisis. Now, here is where you have to pay close attention because this is the part where a lot of the social media coverage gets sloppy. Cathy Engelbert did not just stay silent. She came out publicly and denied saying any of it. She said the comments were inaccurate. She said she did not make those statements. And she said it on the eve of the finals, in front of every camera in Las Vegas. So you have two versions of the same conversation. A player who was there says one thing. A commissioner who was there says the opposite. And we, the public, are left to decide which one to believe. Before we go further, let's slow down and talk about who Cathy Engelbert actually is, because a lot of fans only know her as the woman behind the podium. She came to the WNBA in 2019 from the world of corporate accounting. She had been the chief executive officer of Deloitte, one of the largest professional services firms in the world. She was the first woman to lead a major American accounting firm. She was, by every measure of her previous career, a serious executive. The kind of person you hire when you want to professionalize an institution and grow it into something bigger than it has ever been. And on paper, her tenure at the WNBA has been a success. The league has grown. Attendance is up. Television ratings have shattered records. A new media rights deal worth $2.2 billion over 11 years was signed during her watch. The league finally launched a full charter flight program for players, ending years of complaints about teams being forced to fly commercial. Expansion teams are coming, including the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo. From the outside, this should be the best moment in WNBA history. But here is the problem. Growing a business is not the same as managing the people inside it. And what we have learned over the last several months is that whatever Cathy Engelbert has done in the boardroom and at the negotiating table for television contracts, she has apparently failed at the more human part of the job. Players do not feel heard. Coaches feel ignored. The union does not trust her. And when Napheesa Collier wrote her statement, the response from around the league was not, "She's exaggerating." The response was a long list of players and coaches stepping forward to say, in their own words, that the leadership at the top of the WNBA was broken. Aya Wilson, the Las Vegas Aces star who just won her 4th Most Valuable Player award, said she was disgusted by the alleged comments. She said she would ride with Collier. Sophie Cunningham, a player on the Phoenix Mercury, said it was shameful that Engelbert always made things about herself. Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Lynx, was suspended and fined for her own post-game comments about the league's officiating. And here is where Stephanie White enters the story, but not the way you might think. If you've watched any of the YouTube videos about this story over the last few months, you have probably been told that Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, was somehow the villain who started all of this. You may have heard claims that she gave a pre-game interview before facing Caitlin Clark and the Fever in which she laid out a strategy of physical play designed to wear Clark down. You may have heard that her words became a kind of permission slip for the rest of the league to brutalize Clark all season long. Here is what actually happened. Stephanie White is not coaching against Caitlin Clark. She is coaching Caitlin Clark. White was hired by the Indiana Fever before the 2025 season as their new head coach. She used to coach the Connecticut Sun, and before that she had a long history in Indiana basketball, including time as a Fever assistant. So when she stepped to the microphone in October of 2025 to talk about Caitlin Clark and the league's treatment of her star player, she was not the opposing coach. She was Clark's own boss. The leader of Clark's franchise. The person responsible for protecting her. And what Stephanie White said about Caitlin Clark in early October was not aggressive. It was protective. Speaking on a local Indianapolis radio show called Query & Company, on station 107.5 The Fan, White went out of her way to defend Clark in the middle of the Collier-Engelbert dispute. Her exact words, as reported across multiple outlets, were, quote, "I hate it all for Caitlin. You know, she's a 23-year-old kid who loves to play this game, who is a pawn in a lot of other people's games and a lot of other people's narratives. And I hate that for her. That is not a coach trying to take Caitlin Clark down. That is a coach watching a young player get dragged into a labor dispute that has nothing to do with her, and trying to push back on the people doing the dragging." White went further. She compared Clark to Tiger Woods and Serena Williams. She said only a handful of athletes in history had ever experienced the level of attention and pressure Clark was now facing. She praised Clark's maturity. She said Clark handled the whole circus with grace and humility. Those are not the words of a villain. Those are the words of a coach who is genuinely worried about her player. So how did the narrative get so twisted online? Part of it is the natural compression of social media, where every story has to have a hero and a villain and a clear cause and effect. Part of it is that Stephanie White has had a complicated season for other reasons, including being fined for her own criticism of WNBA officiating. And part of it, frankly, is that some content creators saw a coach whose name was in the headlines and decided to make her the bad guy because it was easier than explaining the actual labor and governance dispute at the heart of this story. To really understand why all of this is happening right now, in this exact moment, you have to know about the collective bargaining agreement. Every professional sports league in North America operates under what is called a CBA. It is the contract between the league and the players' union that governs everything. How much players get paid. How long contracts can be. How free agency works. How playoff bonuses are structured. Charter flights. Healthcare. Maternity leave. All of it. The WNBA's previous collective bargaining agreement was set to expire after the 2025 season. And the negotiations for the next one have been, by all accounts, Ugly. The players want a much bigger share of league revenue, especially now that the league is generating more money than ever before. They want their salaries to reflect the reality that stars like Caitlin Clark are earning the league tens of millions of new fans and billions in television rights money, while Clark herself was paid $76,535 for the 2025 season. That is not a typo. The highest-profile rookie in modern WNBA history made less than $90,000 from her actual basketball job. Meanwhile, Clark's off-the-court endorsement portfolio, according to figures cited by Napheesa Collier, is worth around $16 million. Nike, Gatorade, State Farm. The list goes on. So you have a situation where the league is profiting enormously from a player who is barely making middle-class money from her actual contract. And the players see this. They are not blind. They look at Caitlin Clark, and they see the most valuable marketing asset their league has ever had, and they see her getting paid like an intern. And they ask themselves, if she is making that little, what are the rest of us worth in the eyes of this league? That is the context for Napheesa Collier's statement. That is why she did not just talk about officiating or about her own injury. She talked about player value. She talked about how the league treats its biggest stars. And that is why the alleged comment about Caitlin Clark being on her knees, true or not, hit so hard. Because to the players, that comment is not just an insult to Clark. It is a window into how the league office views all of them. It is the league saying, you should be grateful we let you play here. And in a year when the union is trying to negotiate the biggest contract in WNBA history, that is exactly the wrong message to send. Cathy Engelbert, for her part, has said the goal is to avoid a lockout next season. She has said she wants a transformative deal. But she has also admitted there is a, quote, long way to go. And meanwhile, the calendar is ticking. Because there are practical deadlines that the WNBA cannot miss. There is supposed to be an expansion draft to build the rosters for the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo, which are joining the league. That expansion draft cannot happen until a new CBA is in place. So every day that passes without an agreement is a day that pushes the league closer to a real, structural crisis. While all of this labor drama is happening in the boardroom, there has been a parallel crisis on the court that has made everything worse. The officiating in the WNBA in 2025 was, by nearly universal agreement, terrible. And not just terrible in a way that fans complain about every year. Terrible in a way that coaches were publicly calling out, that players were getting hurt over, and that the commissioner herself eventually admitted needed major change. The complaints had been building all season. Hard fouls that were not called. Plays where stars got knocked around with no whistle. Inconsistent application of the rules from one game to the next. Coaches were getting fined for saying out loud what every fan watching at home could see. Stephanie White, the Fever coach we just talked about, was one of the coaches who got fined for her comments about officiating. So was Las Vegas Aces head coach Becky Hammon. Cheryl Reeve, the Minnesota Lynx coach, was suspended and fined after the play in which Napheesa Collier got hurt, partly because of how she responded to what she saw as a failure by the officials. The most damning part of Collier's statement was when she addressed this directly. She said when she asked the commissioner about fixing the officiating, the response was, quote, only the losers complain about the refs. That is not just a dismissive comment. That is a commissioner telling the players that their concerns about their physical safety on the court were the whining of sore losers. And those are concerns that are well documented. Caitlin Clark herself spent much of her rookie season getting knocked around in ways that drew the attention of national media. There was the Chendi Carter shoulder check in Chicago that was eventually upgraded to a flagrant foul after public pressure. There was the Angel Reese block that drew blood. There were dozens of smaller incidents that never made it to the national highlight reel but that fans of the Fever saw every single night. By the time the finals rolled around in October, Cathy Engelbert had to address the officiating problem head-on. At that same press conference where she denied the Collier allegations, she announced that the WNBA was creating a, quote, multi-stakeholder task force to address concerns about officiating. She admitted, in her own words, that the league was, quote, misaligned currently with what our stakeholders want from officiating. That is corporate language for, we know our refs are doing a bad job and everyone is angry about it. It was an admission that should have come months earlier. By the time it arrived, It felt to a lot of players like an apology offered only after the building had already burned down. Now we have to talk about the player at the center of the story, even though, in a strange way, she was barely on the court for most of it. Caitlin Clark's 2025 season was, in basketball terms, mostly a disaster. Not because of her play but because of her body. She suffered a groin injury that limited her to 13 games for the entire regular season. 13 games. That is not even a quarter of the WNBA schedule. The biggest star in the league spent most of the year on the bench, watching, rehabbing, doing everything she could to get back on the court. And yet, even with her limited availability, the Indiana Fever's semifinals matchup against the Las Vegas Aces became the most watched WNBA semifinals in television history. Think about that for a second. A team that played most of its season without its franchise player still generated record-breaking ratings the moment the playoffs started. That tells you something about the level of interest in Caitlin Clark personally, and it tells you something about how dependent the league has become on her presence. When she did play, the numbers were strong. 16.5 points per game. 8.8 assists. 5 rebounds. Those are all-star numbers in an all-star season. They just came in only 13 appearances. And then, when the Collier statement broke and the whole league erupted into public chaos, Clark was asked about it. She was asked about Engelbert's alleged comments. She was asked about everything. And her response was 3 words. Quote, "No comment." That is, in its own quiet way, one of the most important moments of the entire saga. Caitlin Clark, the most marketable athlete in the league, the player whose name was being used as a weapon by both sides, the player whose paycheck was being held up as evidence of the league's failure to value its stars, refused to engage with any of it. She did not defend Engelbert. She did not pile on with Collier. She said no comment, and she went back to rehabbing her injury. Stephanie White, her coach, later said that Clark understood the big picture. That she had perspective. That she got it. And looking at how Clark handled this, it is hard to argue with that read. Clark did, however, make one thing very clear. She told reporters she planned to stay in the WNBA. She turned down a reported $1 million contract from Unrivaled, the new 3-on-3 league founded by Napheesa Collier and Breanna Stewart, the same league that some inside the WNBA increasingly view as a competitor. Clark could have left. She could have taken the bigger paycheck and joined a startup that was treating its players better. But she chose to stay. And that decision, more than anything else, is what gives Cathy Engelbert and the rest of the WNBA leadership a path forward. As long as Clark is in the WNBA, the league has its biggest asset. The moment she leaves, the whole growth story collapses. We need to spend a few minutes on Unrivaled, because it is one of the most important pieces of this puzzle that almost nobody is talking about on the surface level. Unrivaled is a 3-on-3 women's basketball league founded by Napheesa Collier, the same player at the center of the Engelbert dispute, along with Breanna Stewart, another WNBA star and one of the most accomplished players in the modern game. The league played its first season in Miami in January of 2025. And the salaries it paid were significantly higher than what most WNBA players make. Now, here is where things get interesting. Multiple reports have indicated that Collier and Stewart originally offered the WNBA a small equity share in Unrivaled. The idea, according to sources cited in ESPN's coverage of the story, was to show alignment. To say to the league, look, this new venture is not meant to be a competitor. It is meant to be a supplement, a way for players to earn money in the off-season when they used to have to play overseas for very little pay and worse conditions. By giving the WNBA a piece of Unrivaled, Collier and Stewart wanted to demonstrate that they were on the same team as the league. What happened next, according to those same sources, was that things broke down. The relationship soured. Some inside the WNBA started to view Unrivaled not as a partner but as a threat. A rival league that was paying players better, treating them better, and offering a glimpse of what life as a professional women's basketball player could look like outside the existing structure. And in February of 2025, Cathy Engelbert called a meeting with Collier and Collier's husband Alex Bazell, who is the president of Unrivaled. That meeting is the meeting where Collier says the commissioner made the dismissive comments about Clark and about officiating. That meeting is where the seeds of the October blow-up were planted. So when you put all of this together, You start to see a much bigger picture than just one coach versus one player or one commissioner versus one union vice president. You start to see a power struggle. The WNBA is the established league. Unrivaled is the upstart. The two have to coexist because most unrivaled players are also WNBA players. But there is real tension about who controls the future of women's professional basketball. Is it the WNBA, owned in part by the NBA, with its decades of history? Or is it Unrivaled, owned by the players themselves, paying better wages, growing fast, and showing what is possible when the people on the court also have a seat at the ownership table? Caitlin Clark, by the way, was the one major star who chose not to participate in Unrivaled. She turned down that reported $1 million contract. She stayed loyal to the WNBA. And that is part of why her name kept coming up in the dispute. To Collier and the union, Clark's loyalty to the WNBA is exactly the kind of leverage the league is taking advantage of. To Engelbert and the league office, Clark's loyalty is a sign that the WNBA is on the right track. Both sides are claiming her. And Clark, to her credit, just keeps saying no comment. Let's go back to that night in Las Vegas. October 3, 2025. Game 1 of the WNBA Finals between the Las Vegas Aces and the Phoenix Mercury. The Mercury were there because they had eliminated the Lynx in the same series where Collier got hurt. The Aces were the defending champions. By any normal measure, this should have been a night about basketball. About Aya Wilson and her quest for another title. About the Mercury making their first finals appearance in years. Instead, the entire pregame coverage was dominated by Cathy Engelbert. And to her credit, she did not hide. She walked into her annual pre-finals press conference and took every question. The first thing she said about Collier's allegations was direct. Quote, "I did not make those comments." She added, "There is a lot of inaccuracy out there through social media and all of this reporting." She said she highly respected the players. She said there was a lot of emotion and passion in the room because of the ongoing collective bargaining negotiations. She said she was disheartened. She also said something else, which has gotten less attention but is maybe the most important sentence she spoke that whole night. She said, quote, "If the players in the W don't feel appreciated and valued by the league, then we have to do better, and I have to do better." That is, in the language of a corporate executive, about as close to an apology as you are likely to get. It is an acknowledgement that whatever the truth of any specific comment, the bigger picture is broken. The players feel undervalued. They feel disrespected. They do not trust the leadership. And the commissioner just said, in front of every camera in the country, that she heard them and that she needed to do better. Whether that was enough is a different question. Sophie Cunningham, the Phoenix player we mentioned earlier, did not seem to think it was enough when she said it was shameful that Engelbert always made things about herself. Aya Wilson did not seem to think it was enough when she said she was disgusted and would ride with Collier. The damage from the original alleged comment, true or not, was already done. And the gap between what the players are demanding and what the league is willing to give in the collective bargaining negotiations is still, in Engelbert's own admission, a long way from being bridged. Engelbert also rejected rumors that she might step down. There had been speculation in some corners of the basketball media that the pressure might force her out. That the players might demand it. That the league owners might decide she had become more trouble than she was worth. She called those rumors more inaccuracies. She said she was committed to the job. She said she planned to meet with Collier the following week to try to repair the relationship. And then the finals started, and basketball, briefly, was the focus again. So we come back to the question that brought us here. What is this so-called ultimatum that the commissioner has given to Caitlin Clark? And here is where we have to be careful and honest with you, because the truth is more interesting than the clickbait version. There is no documented public ultimatum from Cathy Engelbert to Caitlin Clark. Engelbert did not stand at a podium and say, "Caitlin, you have to do X or else." That did not happen. What did happen, and what is much more complicated, is that the entire situation between the league office, the players' union, Stephanie White, Napheesa Collier, and Caitlin Clark has created a set of pressures that effectively function like an ultimatum, even if no one ever spoke the word. Think about it from Clark's perspective. She is being asked to be a brand ambassador for a league whose own commissioner allegedly called her ungrateful. She is being asked to keep showing up, keep selling tickets, keep driving television ratings, while the union she is technically part of is at war with the office she works for. She is being asked to choose, implicitly, between loyalty to the WNBA, which has given her a platform, and loyalty to the players, who are fighting for the kind of pay and protection she herself does not currently have. And the WNBA, for its part, has effectively told her, by its actions and its inactions, that she is on her own. The league did not protect her from the physical play in her rookie year until public outrage forced it to. The league did not pay her what her market value would suggest she is worth. The league did not, by Collier's account, even speak about her with respect in private meetings. So when people say Caitlin Clark has been given an ultimatum, what they really mean is that the entire structure of her professional life has put her in an impossible position. Stay loyal and underpaid. Or leave, follow Collier and Stewart to a competing league, and be branded as the player who broke the WNBA. Stephanie White's words about Clark being a pawn are, in this light, the most honest summary of the situation anyone has offered. Because that is what she is. She is the asset everyone is fighting over. The league wants her to stay so it can keep growing. The union wants her example to be the proof that the league undervalues its talent. The opposing leagues want her to leave so they can lock in their position as the future of the sport. And Clark herself, just 23 years old, is somehow expected to navigate all of this while also coming back from injury and trying to win a championship. At her Las Vegas press conference, Cathy Engelbert announced the creation of what she called a multi-stakeholder task force to address officiating. Let's break down what that actually means, because the language is corporate enough that it can slide past you if you are not paying attention. A multi-stakeholder task force is, in plain English, a committee. It is a group of people from different parts of the league who are supposed to meet, talk, and come up with recommendations. Engelbert did not say exactly who would be on this task force. She did not say when it would deliver its recommendations. She did not say what authority it would have to actually change anything. What she did say was that the league was, quote, pretty clear that they were misaligned with what stakeholders want from officiating, and that change was needed. Cheryl Reeve, the Minnesota Lynx head coach, had already gone much further. After the play in which Collier got hurt, Reeve called for a change of leadership at the league level when it came to the hiring of referees. She used the word malpractice to describe how the officials had called Game 4 of the semifinals. That kind of language from a respected veteran coach is a 5-alarm fire in any professional sports league. And the task force, as announced, is the commissioner's response to that fire. Whether it is enough remains to be seen. There are also other things on the league's plate that you may not have heard about because they have been overshadowed by the human drama. The Connecticut Sun, one of the league's original franchises, may be sold. The team's current owners, the Mohegan Tribe, are evaluating their options. There has been talk of an investment from funds affiliated with the state of Connecticut, which would let the team stay in its current market. There has also been a competing bid from the WNBA itself, valued at around $250 million, which would let the league relocate the franchise to a city of its choosing. Engelbert said no decision had been made. And then there is the expansion. The Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo are joining the league. Their rosters need to be built. That requires an expansion draft. And the expansion draft cannot happen until the new collective bargaining agreement is in place. So the clock is ticking. Every day without an agreement is a day that pushes the new team's debut further into uncertainty. Every day is a day that the league's growth story risks being delayed by an internal labor fight that should have been resolved months ago. Let's take a moment to talk about the numbers, because numbers cut through the noise. The WNBA in 2025 had its best year ever by almost every measurable standard. Record attendance. Record ratings. Record merchandise sales. A new $2.2 billion media rights deal that will pay the league something close to $200 million per year over 11 years. Charter flights for every team, which had been a player demand for years and which finally got delivered. And yet, the player who drove most of that growth, Caitlin Clark, was paid $76,535. That is the standard rookie scale contract for a top pick in the first 4 years of her career. That number is not a mistake. That is what the previous collective bargaining agreement allowed. That is the structural problem the players are trying to fix. Compare it to the men's side. The lowest paid NBA player makes more than $1 million in their rookie year. The highest-paid star in the NBA can make over $50 million per season. We are not even in the same universe. And the standard defense, that the NBA generates more revenue, is true but increasingly weak as the WNBA's own revenue keeps climbing. The percentage of league revenue that goes to players in the NBA is roughly 50%. In the WNBA, by most estimates, it is closer to 10%. That gap is the heart of the entire dispute. This is the math that Napheesa Collier was talking about. This is the math that made her statement land so hard. Because when the players look at how much money the league is making and how little of it they are getting, and then they hear, allegedly, that the commissioner said they should be on their knees thanking the league, the response is not going to be polite. The response is going to be a 4.5-minute statement at a post-season press conference followed by the worst week the WNBA has had in years. Throughout this whole saga, the response from outside the league has been almost as interesting as the response from inside it. NBA legends have weighed in. Charles Barkley has criticized the officiating. LeBron James has spoken publicly about Caitlin Clark's value to the league. Media personalities like Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee have made the WNBA a regular topic on shows that, just a few years ago, would have ignored women's basketball entirely. That outside attention is a double-edged sword for the league. On one hand, it represents an enormous amount of free publicity. Every time Pat McAfee dedicates a segment to Caitlin Clark, that is millions of eyeballs the WNBA did not have before. Every time Stephen A. Smith argues about WNBA officiating, that is a level of mainstream relevance the league has been chasing for 30 years. The chaos is, in a strange way, good for business. On the other hand, the chaos is also amplifying every internal problem the league has. When the only national coverage you get is about your commissioner allegedly insulting your biggest star, that is not exactly a marketing dream. When the conversation about your league becomes a conversation about labor strife and broken trust between the office and the players, that is not the brand you want to build heading into a transformative media rights deal. Engelbert herself acknowledged this tension at her press conference. She said, quote, "You want to make sure you're capitalizing on all this momentum that we've built up over the last 5 years or so that are really driving viewership into our game and fandom." That is the commissioner saying out loud what everyone in the building already knows. The window is open. The audience is paying attention. If the league cannot get its house in order, that audience will eventually move on. And the multi-billion-dollar opportunity in front of the WNBA could slip away, not because the talent was not there, but because the leadership could not hold the institution together. So where does all of this go from here? Let's lay out the actual stakes and the actual timeline, because this is the part where speculation gets dangerous and we need to be honest about what we know and what we do not. What we know is that Cathy Engelbert has said she plans to meet with Napheesa Collier to try to repair the relationship. What we know is that the collective bargaining negotiations are continuing, and that both sides have said publicly they want to avoid a lockout. What we know is that the league is creating a task force on officiating, that the expansion teams in Portland and Toronto are waiting on a new CBA, and that the Connecticut Sun's ownership situation is unresolved. What we do not know is whether the commissioner will survive this. The rumors that she might be forced out have been denied, but rumors in professional sports have a way of becoming reality when they reach a certain mass. If the players keep speaking out publicly against her leadership, and if the labor negotiations stall, the team owners who actually employ Engelbert may decide that a fresh face would be better positioned to close the deal. That is not a prediction. That is a possibility. And it is one that, before 2025, almost nobody was talking about. What we also do not know is what Caitlin Clark does next. She is rehabbing from her groin injury. She has said she plans to stay in the WNBA. She has refused to engage with the political fight around her. But she is 23 years old. She has many years of her career ahead of her. And the decisions she makes about her contract, about her endorsements, about her loyalty to the league versus her loyalty to her fellow players, will shape the next decade of women's professional basketball. If she eventually decides that the WNBA does not value her, and she takes her marketing power somewhere else, the entire growth story collapses. If she stays, and she leads the way to a better collective bargaining agreement, she becomes the figure most responsible for finally pushing the league into the mainstream era. Stephanie White, for her part, will keep coaching the Indiana Fever. She has been criticized this season for various rotation decisions, including some games where she sat Clark for stretches that did not make sense to anyone watching. There has been some media speculation about whether her relationship with Clark is as strong as it should be, but most of that is reading tea leaves rather than reporting facts. What we know from her own public statements is that she has defended Clark, called her a transcendent talent, and described her as a pawn in other people's games. That does not sound like a coach trying to undermine her star player. That sounds like a coach trying to protect her from forces neither of them controls. Let's step back, all the way back, and look at what this whole story actually says about women's professional sports in 2025 and 2026. Because this is bigger than one commissioner and one player and one coach. This is about a moment of transformation that the WNBA has been working toward for almost 3 decades, and whether the institution can actually handle the success it has been chasing. For most of its history, the WNBA was a niche product. It existed, but it did not break through. The mainstream sports media barely covered it. National advertisers did not throw money at it. Television ratings were modest. Attendance was lower than the league office wanted. The players, by every objective measure, were underpaid relative to what they brought to the league. And the people who built the league, the legends like Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird and Tamika Catchings and Lisa Leslie, did it largely without the kind of attention and money that would have made their careers easier. Then Caitlin Clark happened. And almost overnight, the WNBA had something it had never had before. A crossover star whose appeal extended beyond the dedicated fanbase. A player who could fill an arena in any city, who could move television ratings, who could make sponsors pay attention. The growth that followed was not subtle. It was explosive. And the league was, frankly, not prepared for it. That lack of preparation is, in many ways, what we have been talking about for this entire video. The officiating was not ready for the scrutiny. The players' safety protocols were not ready for the attention. The labor agreement was not ready for the new revenue. The relationship between the league office and the players was not strong enough to handle the strain. Cathy Engelbert came from a corporate background where you can grow a business through strategy and execution. But running a league is not just running a business. It is managing a community of people who have their own histories, their own grievances, their own demands. And when the business suddenly becomes 10 times bigger than it was a few years earlier, those people demand to be heard in a way they never did before. That is the story underneath the story. That is what is actually happening. The WNBA is going through the kind of growing pains that every successful institution goes through eventually. The question is not whether there is a crisis. There clearly is. The question is whether the institution can grow up fast enough to match the moment. As of this recording, here is where things stand. The 2025 WNBA Finals were won, the off-season is underway, and the major business of the league has become the collective bargaining negotiation. Engelbert is still the commissioner. Collier is recovering from her injury and is one of the most influential voices in the players' union. Clark is rehabbing. Stephanie White is preparing for next season. The Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo are getting closer to their debut. The new collective bargaining agreement has not been finalized at the time of this recording. The expansion draft has not been scheduled. The officiating task force has not delivered its recommendations. The relationship between the league office and the players' union remains, by all accounts, fragile. Some players have said it is beyond repair. Engelbert has said she is committed to repairing it. Caitlin Clark, the player at the center of everything, has continued to say very little publicly about any of this. She has expressed her commitment to the WNBA. She has expressed her trust in her coach, Stephanie White. She has continued her rehabilitation. And she has continued to be the most marketable athlete in women's basketball, possibly in all of American sports, full stop. What you should take away from all of this, if you take away just one thing, is that the story you may have heard, the version where a coach gave an ultimatum and started a war and pulled a player into the middle of it, is not what actually happened. What actually happened was a labor dispute, fueled by years of underpayment and disrespect, that exploded in public in the worst possible moment for the league. What actually happened was a commissioner who may or may not have said something disastrous in a private meeting, who then had to publicly deny it on the eve of her biggest event of the year. What actually happened was a coach who tried to defend her player from a fight she did not start. And what actually happened was a young athlete, 23 years old, who handled the whole circus with more poise than most veterans twice her age. So there it is. The story of how the WNBA almost burned down its own moment of triumph. The story of Cathy Engelbert, Napheesa Collier, Stephanie White, and Caitlin Clark, and how four people who probably never thought they would all be in the same news cycle ended up defining the most consequential season in the league's history. I want to leave you with a question, and I want you to actually think about it, not just scroll past it. If Caitlin Clark decided, at the end of all this, to leave the WNBA and take her talents to Unrivaled or to a new league entirely, would you blame her? Given everything she has been through, given what her actual salary has been, given what her coach has called her treatment as a pawn in other people's games, would you blame her for walking away? And if you would not blame her, what does that say about where the WNBA is right now, and what its leadership needs to do to make sure she does not? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me whether you believe Engelbert's denial or Collier's accusation. Tell me what you think of Stephanie White and whether she has been treated fairly by the media. And while you are down there in the comments, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button if you have not already, because we cover this kind of story, the real story behind the headlines, every single week. The next video is going to break down exactly what is in the new collective bargaining proposal and what it would mean for the future of the WNBA. You will not want to miss it. Thanks for watching. I am going to be here doing this as long as you keep showing up to listen. Take care of each other, and I will see you next time.